Hello, welcome to this introductory Python tutorial. In this video we are going to learn about functions. So what are functions? What are they useful for? Well, functions are a useful device that allows you to group together a set of statements that you want to run more than once. This allows you to create reusable code and avoid writing the same code multiple times. It also improves readability and allows you to debug your code much easier and allows you to do something called abstraction. That's when you put some of your code into when you put some of your code into a function, you don't have to think about how it works. You can just trust that it works correctly and focus on other stuff. So as always, it's much easier to understand it with an example. Let's create the simplest function imaginable. To do that, we first use a keyword def, which stands for define. Then we can write a name of a function, which can be anything. Let's say it's a hello. And then we are going to just write pass. That's it. This is the first simplest function that you could ever create. Pass means that it doesn't do anything, but because every function has to have some code in its body, as you can see intended, the code of the function is after a colon and it has to be intended. And if you write it without pass, it will throw an error. But pass allows you to create a function that does nothing. So to call this function, you can just type its name and execute this code. That's it. So pretty boring, huh? Let's make it a little bit more interesting. First, let's teach it how to greet a user. Let's just type print hello. Now every time I execute it, it will print out hello. That's also pretty boring because you could just write print hello. So what's the benefit of a function? Well, for example, we can pass it an argument. An argument is basically a variable you will be able to use in a function. You can pass it any number of variables, but let's start with one. Let's pass it a name. And then add it to our print statement. Uh-oh, we have an error. What happened? Well, I have added an argument to the function, but I have not passed it when I have executed it, which is a problem because this function needs this variable to be defined. So let's just pass it. Great. So as you can see, I have defined the variable, I have used it in my function, and I have passed it so that I would be able to use it. I can just as easily use any other name, and it will automatically use it in our print statement. Excellent. So I guess you can see how a function may be useful. It can have any number of lines of code over here in its body, and they can be customized based on the variables you pass, and that allows you to do a lot of very cool and powerful things. So let's do something more interesting. A function can also return certain values. Let's say we want to create a function that adds two numbers. Let's type def add two numbers. We will pass it two variables this time, a and b, and we will return a plus b. Now if we want to use it, we just type add two numbers, 2 and 5, and it will automatically add them for us. This return statement returns the value of this expression or whatever you place after it, so you can always that allows you to put the returned value into a variable, and now this value is contained in this variable. As you can probably guess, you can have a long list of statements over here that can do all sorts of complicated math, and it will all be able to just be executed by writing a simple function. So that's when where abstraction comes in. Let's say you need to write a huge function that does a lot of complicated math. and calculates, I don't know, circumference of Jupiter. Here you could just write it and make sure that it does it correctly, and then you would just type a function, calculate circumference of Jupiter, and pass it a few variables, and you will be able to make sure that it always works correctly, and you can use it in your code as many times as you want, and it will work just fine, and it will be easy to debug and easy to use and easy to understand what's going on. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is default values. As previously in our hello function, we will not be able to run it without passing something to it. It returned an error. But if I create so-called named argument and pass it a default value, now I can run a function without passing it anything, because I have already specified the default value over here. Excellent. Next thing I wanted to tell you about is docstrings. Again, we will use the same hello function as an example, and before we do anything, we will type 3 quotation marks to open a docstring and 3 quotation marks to close it. And then we can type any documentation we want about this function. We can explain anything we want. For example, we can say this function greets a user. So whenever another programmer tries to use it and tries to figure out what it does, if he is using Jupyter, for example, he can just type hello and shift tab after that, and he will be able to see the docstring over here that explains what your function does, which can be incredibly useful and convenient. You don't have to always use it, but you can use it sometimes, and it could be very useful. So that's functions. They can accept values, they can accept named arguments. Okay, let me explain to you something about named and positional arguments. So let's say I want to create a function that first, okay, so here, okay, so let's create a function. As an example, I have passed it a couple of positional arguments that they always have to come first, like in order. For example, if I want first to be first name and then last name, these have to be passed in order. And then if I want to add some optional arguments, I can add named arguments afterwards. So now if I want to use this function, I can pass it different positional arguments like so. Excuse me. What I meant to say is this. Last name. So two positional arguments can be passed like so, in order. And then named arguments will be able to be passed optionally. So then if I want to pass a different school, like, I can always do that, like so. So final topic I wanted to cover is args and keyword args. These are the special words that are used in some functions that new people are sometimes confused by, but they're very simple. This keyword, the args keyword, represents any number of positional arguments that you want to pass, and keyword arguments represents any number of keyword arguments you want to pass. So let's have a little bit of better example. Let's write a function called userinfo. Pass it define its parameters like so, and then just print out to see what's happening, what's going on here. So I'm going to call this function right here. I have first passed it 2 positional arguments and then 1 keyword argument, Let's pass another one. As you can see, positional arguments were taken in by this variable and put into an args variable. When I print it out, I can just see it's a tuple of two arguments. There could be any number of them, and it would be in this. They would be in this tuple. Same goes with keyword arguments, except they are represented as a dictionary. Name of the variable is the key, and its value is its value. So in case you need to write a function that accepts any number of arguments that you don't know in advance how many there will be of them, you can always use these keywords, and then, as you can see, you can do with this information whatever you want. So that's a bit of a more advanced topic, and in the future you will get more familiar with it. But for now, that will be enough for you to understand that this just allows you to accept any number of arguments that you want. So there you go, these are functions. Let's recap quickly. You can define them using def. They allow you to reuse any amount of code. They allow you to return things with the return statement. So if you make a difficult, complicated calculation, you can just use return and return its value if you want. You can pass it default values. You can use positional arguments. They are the first that come that are being passed, and then named arguments have to be passed with the name of a variable that you want to use. And finally, you can use args and keyword args to accept any number of them that you want. So I hope this video was useful to you, and I'll see you in my future tutorials.